Milo Yiannopoulos is a hero who opposes bigotry of the hypersensitive, politically correct kind that is used to silence dissent, crush free expression, emasculate men in the West, and invite the gang rape of Christian and secular women alike by Muslims fighting a war that began more than 1,000 years ago. In gleeful retaliation, excerpts from a drunken peasants podcast interview hosted by T.J. Kirk, who prattles on YouTube as the amazing atheist, and Paul's ego were used to attack Milo. Within the space of a few days following this, Google attacked the internet media powerhouse of Alex Jones by closing his AdRoll account for InfoWars, costing him up to $5 million during the 2017 year. Within hours of this, Google then attacked Mike Adams, delisting his naturalnews.com website from Google search. Where is all this coming from? It seems clear that the deep state is retaliating against the fifth estate for supporting Donald Trump. In other words, they're retaliating against working-class Americans to put us back under their thumb where they can continue their relentless efforts to grind us into submission. And as they control most of the wealth and have most of the control over how we communicate, they're starting there first. And so far, they are enjoying great success. But they should enjoy their victories while they can because, as my own experiences from 1995 demonstrate, it is sure to be short-lived. In late 1994, I was interviewed by a staff reporter from the Seattle Times. Under the oversight of editor Mindy Cameron and executive editor Mike Fancher, she wrote an article that portrayed me as a sexist misogynist. Here's what I wrote about that experience back in 1995. 1995, Bellevue, Washington. Generally, the only members of the mainstream media who enjoyed interviewing me seemed to be conservative and liberal radio talk show hosts. Conservatives enjoyed having me on their show because it gave them a chance to feature an articulate, knowledgeable, and authoritative non-extremist who shared many of their opinions. Moderates because I dished it out without going off the deep end, like the time on Andy Beck's show before she and her husband Jim Altoff moved to the Midwest. Former Seattle National Organization of Women co-president Louise Chernin was on the air trying to defend their slogan, "Stop Sucking and Start Biting." In response to one of her many complaints about men, I quipped, "Men will be nice when nice guys get laid." I think their ratings must have jumped 50 points after that. Perhaps this is why progressives tend to interview me only on tape or for articles where they can cut, splice, and take things out of context. I think it's likely they do this less for ideological reasons than to boost ratings or increase circulation, or to simply maintain the status quo by slapping us down. Maybe this is what the Seattle Times had in mind when they published a January 10, 1995 hit piece article about me, linked below, and the backlash. Right off, they quoted the following: "When men make money, they spend it on women. When women make money, they spend it on themselves. 71 cents on the dollar is too much. Women should get no more than 50% on the dollar, and for the first 10 years, they should work for free." Yes, that did come from the backlash. It was one of our PC Seldom quotes. They're always acerbic, tongue-in-cheek, and about as politically correct as Al Bundy. Evidently, however, the folks at the Seattle Times didn't appreciate PC Seldom's sense of humor because the reporter described this as the gender war ungloved. I wonder how they would have described the many negative generalizations about men that the Seattle Times has promoted. Nuclear annihilation, perhaps? From there, they turned their attention to Pat Faute's article, 7 times 7 times 7 times 7. Taking some of his examples of what the feminist inclination to exaggerate might look like if we indulged in it ourselves, and recasting them in a different context to make it appear we actually believed them. Quote, "Rod," they wrote, "comes off as soft-spoken, even pensive, not what one might picture as the man responsible for publishing such misogynistic musings as this. The average man's brain weighs 557 pounds more than the average woman's brain. The average woman has 14,189 more pounds of subcutaneous fat than the average man. Much of this fat is in women's heads, where obviously they have some room to spare. We're accustomed to having the mainstream media misrepresent us, but when Pat saw how far the Seattle Times went, he wrote the following to Michael Fancher, since retired executive editor at the Seattle Times. Dear Mr. Fancher, I wish to register a complaint against your reporter. She took something I wrote for the Backlash completely out of context and made it look sinister when it was obviously meant to be humorous and tongue-in-cheek. The main point of my article was to expand on Christina Hoff Sommers' idea that the media are highly slanted toward feminist principles to the degree of distorting any opposing views, and your paper sure proved my point. I knew when I wrote that article that some women's advocates could take it out of context and use it against me and the point I was making, but I never expected any of the mainstream media to have the temerity to do this. Certainly they would have some integrity. Silly me. I've included copies of both articles so that you can judge for yourself whether I committed misogynistic musings or we are owed an apology. My article appeared in the November 1994 Backlash. The Seattle Times article appeared in the January 10, 1995 Scene section. Here's what Mike Fancher wrote in reply. Dear Mr. Faute, thank you for your letter. I've reviewed your original article in the Backlash and the portion of the Times article to which you refer. To be honest, I think most readers would assume the quotes used from your Backlash article were meant to be cynical, another synonym for misogynistic. I doubt many of our women readers found the quotes humorous, but I also doubt they found them sinister. I'm sorry if you feel we distorted your views. At least we didn't use the quote about your 506-foot penis. Now that would have been sinister. Sincerely, Michael R. Fancher. Well, it's nice to see Mike has a sense of humor. Unfortunately, his sense of perspective may suffer from the fact that he occupied a position of power and influence shared by less than 3% of the American male population of any race. As one who had to confront being homeless twice, before my 5th birthday and a few times since then, I can only wonder what it must be like to enjoy that kind of security, and at how gratified he might feel to learn I lost my job at Egghead Software almost immediately following publication of their article, which was not just slanted, but also sensationalistic. Quote, "The tone of the Backlash is edgy," she wrote, "sometimes even violent." Close quote. In January's 1995 issue, she continued, the magazine tackled sexual harassment. Why shouldn't men be able to argue that women wearing tight sweaters and libido-arousing perfumes are guilty of sexual harassment? The myth of female powerlessness. Since 1920, women have had control of the American political system because they have been the majority of voters, and maternal bias in custody cases. Close quote. This is edgy and violent. Sounds like feminist doublespeak to me. Consider the January article she didn't mention, Jeff Seaman's Gender Bigotry Both Kinds, Since When is Misogyny a Valid Response to Misandry? Armin Brat's When Domestic Violence Hurts Kids, and Raj Kumar Singh's essay on vasectomy and choice for men, just to name a few. We can only speculate as to why the Seattle Times chose to indulge in the bias and sensationalism typical of a cheap tabloid. Maybe it's simply a matter of everybody's doing it, so why shouldn't we? Or perhaps they serve an agenda less principled than we might hope. So what exactly was the context of Pat's 7 to the 4th Power article? Here it is. Feminist Lies and Distortions by Pat Faute, 1994, Seattle, Washington. Many men in the men's movement have long complained about the distortions and outright lies propagated by many feminists. But because it was men complaining and because men have no credibility in gender issues, they were ignored. But now Christina Hoff Sommers, a woman, is saying some of the same things, and, surprise, she is believed. Or at least she's getting attention. She has credibility. If you've not checked out her book yet, Who Stole Feminism? Please make haste. Sommers exposes many of the bogus studies, distortions, and fictions made popular by some of the women's movement, which they have used to get increased sympathy as well as increased government spending for women. She also throws the penalty flag on the news media for spreading such misinformation without checking or questioning. Apparently, if a feminist says it, it must be true. So much for journalistic integrity. Here are a few examples from Summers' book. Domestic violence against pregnant women is the leading cause of birth defects. This was reported by the Boston Globe, Time Magazine, and the Chicago Tribune. The New York Times, Good Morning America, and the Boston Globe were all instrumental in spreading the fallacy of increased wife abuse during the Super Bowl. Suspicious and one-sided pronouncements from an American Association of University Women, or AAUW, study on educational discrimination against girls were reported widely. A follow-up study sponsored by the AAUW resulted in over 1,400 stories in the media. Respected papers and magazines, including Time, the San Francisco Chronicle, the Los Angeles Times, and the New York Times, all reported the distortions of this advocacy study as fact. The example I found most interesting were claims by Gloria Steinem and Naomi Wolf that about 150,000 girls and women die each year from anorexia. This figure has been repeated as fact by Ann Landers, as well as a college textbook titled, ironically enough, The Knowledge Explosion. The actual number of annual deaths from anorexia is a bit lower. Taking the numbers from 3 years and averaging them yields a figure of 74. Now, of course, 74 deaths is significant, especially if you happen to be one of them, but it ain't no Holocaust, and it ain't about 150,000. Ms. Steinem was off by a factor of 2,027. Let me see if I can put that into context for you. Here are some of the statistics that are off by a factor of 2,027. Let's see if the media unquestioningly repeats them as fact. After all, my first name may lead some to mistake me for a female. So here are some examples. There are approximately 2.6 billion more women than men attending college in the United States. Where's the American Association of University Men with a study of boys' low self-worth? For that matter, where's the American Association of University Men? If it existed, maybe it could research the fact that boys suffer from dyslexia 12,000 times more often than girls. Even though women are getting inferior health care, they still outlive men by 13,986 years, on average. So maybe now the government could sponsor an Office of Research on Men's Health and throw big bucks into a men's health initiative. Female-eligible voters outnumber male-eligible voters in the United States by about 18.4 billion. Now we know why all those politicians are falling all over themselves to pass legislation that is beneficial to women. Funny, I must have missed the Chicago Tribune article detailing this. Women are 4,054 times as likely as men to be judged insane or incompetent to stand trial. Now let's see if any of the gender bias task forces study this bias by the courts. Let's also see the media do 1,400 stories on this aspect of the Lorena Bobbitt case. The Vietnam War Memorial contains the names of 8 women and over 100 million men. The memorial honors all who died, but apparently we value women more than men because women get a special Vietnam monument. Obviously, one woman is worth at least as much as 12.5 million men. When will Ellen Goodman do a column? Here's a possible title: The Monument to Paternalism and the Undervaluing of Men. In the U.S., about 1.8 million women are abused by significant others, but 4.3 billion men are battered by wives or girlfriends. Where are the headlines and special reports? Of every 100 children victimized by domestic violence, 125,674 are victimized by mothers. Also, 125,674 of every 100 of the victims are boys. The facts are indisputable and unquestionable. Just print them. Male homicide victims outnumber female murder victims by 22,594,969 each year in the United States. Where's the public outcry? Where's Joe Biden with a Violence Against Men Act? It looks like men are giving more than 110% when it comes to work-related deaths because 188 8,511% of these deaths are men. This would make a good report on Good Morning America. Why haven't I heard it yet? The average man's brain weighs 557 pounds more than the average woman's brain. Come on, New York Times, don't question it, just print it. It's a fact. The average woman has 14,189 more pounds of subcutaneous fat than the average man. Certainly, some men's advocacy group could do some research and conclude that much of this fat is in women's heads, where obviously they have some spare room. And finally, I would like to state for the record that even right after I jump out of an ice-cold lake, my penis is still over 506 feet long. I said it, it must be true. Perhaps Time could do a cover story. Or we can just confront the fact that truth was the first casualty of the feminists' war on men. How can feminists put forth distortions of such magnitude? I think Hiram Johnson had the answer when he said that truth is the first casualty of war. Perhaps I'm being guilty of a little exaggeration myself, but I believe many feminists are at war with men. Christina Hoff Sommers seems to agree. Here's what she said in response to distortions by National Organization of Women President Patricia Ireland. Quote, "But Ireland knows what she's doing. By so construing male-female relations, she is doing what any political leader does in time of war, get potential allies angry and unified behind the effort to defeat the enemy." Close quote. Louise Chernin, a former co-president of the Seattle chapter of the National Organization for Women, once referred to men as the enemy. I've got it on tape, Louise, so don't try to deny it. I just wonder when men will realize they are in a war and start fighting back. 2017, Olympia, Washington. In response to Pat's article exposing just a few of the lies and exaggerations promulgated by the fake news of the 1990s, the local heavy in fake news from Seattle, the Seattle Times, lashed out to beat us down and shut us up. As a direct consequence of their article, which distorted our position, I lost my job and all support to continue publishing the Backlash Zine, which forced me to suspend publication. Ironically, this ordeal provided the impetus for me to learn HTML, which was a lot easier in 1995 than it is today. Less than 2 months later, I registered the Backlash.com domain with Network Solutions and began publishing the Backlash at Backlash.com. In less than a year, I went from having about 7,000 readers in the Seattle region to having millions of readers worldwide. Anybody could have done it. Most of the guys who worked with me on the Backlash Zine were more talented and intelligent than I was, or am. Pat, not his real name, wrote some of the best articles for the zine. P.C. Seldom, also not a real name, was a certified genius and probably the most brilliant man I'll ever know. They could have done it better than me, but perhaps because they were smarter or less stubborn, it was left to me. There are many talented men of intelligence and integrity today who perform a similar function on YouTube, Minds.com, Gab, and elsewhere. And once again, the mainstream fake news propagandists are lashing out. Milo is one of their targets, and now he has apologized for saying the same kinds of things that on the left are celebrated. As Black Pigeon pointed out in his MILO-Gate video, linked below, Salon magazine promoted pedophilia as an alternative lifestyle, and Lena Dunham was celebrated for writing about how she molested her little sister. And as Heat Street reported recently, George Takei spoke glowingly about being molested by an older man. Where was the outrage? Progressives don't care about pedophilia, except when they can use it to attack us. Progressives still don't care about the sex crimes of Bill and Hillary Clinton. If they react at all to news of their own predations, it's to shrug them off. But where we are concerned, they turn the slightest offense into a crime against humanity. Is it any wonder why so few of us are willing or able to step out from behind the veil of anonymity to take the beatings dished out by the progressives? But with the support of the legion who work in the anonymous trenches behind pseudonyms and masks, those of us who, like Milo, do, will prevail. Remember what Happy Harry Hardon said in the great movie Pump Up the Volume. The truth is a virus. To help spread the truth virus, I urge all of my listeners to #StandByMilo and give your support to Infowars.com and NaturalNews.com, who are also being attacked by Google. The progressives are mighty, but we are many, and if we stand together, we shall prevail. For the Backlash at Backlash.com, my name is Rod Van Mechelen.